The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the third time. At 28, he had served in the Royal Guard for 6 years, and every day brought the same meticulous routine. Polish the buttons until they gleamed like mirrors, ensure the red tunic bore no wrinkles, and maintain the stoic expression that had become his trademark among the palace staff. James had never imagined himself in this position when he first enlisted in the British Army at 18. Born in a small Yorkshire town where his father worked in the coal mines and his mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families on the hill, military service had seemed like his only path to a better life. The Royal Guard selection process had been grueling, but James possessed something that set him apart from other candidates: an unwavering sense of duty and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. Princess Charlotte, now 15 years old, had been under James's protection detail for the past 2 years. She was known throughout the palace for her quick wit, her passion for environmental causes, and her tendency to test the boundaries of royal protocol. Unlike her more reserved older brother, Charlotte possessed a spark of rebellion that kept her security team constantly alert. The princess had grown from a shy child into a confident young woman who seemed to carry the weight of royal expectations with surprising grace. Her schedule was packed with charitable events, educational commitments, and public appearances that would exhaust most adults. Yet she approached each obligation with genuine enthusiasm, earning her the admiration of both the public and palace staff. James remembered the first time he had been assigned to Charlotte's detail. She had been 13 then, all gangly limbs and nervous energy. During a visit to a children's hospital, she had spent hours talking to patients, completely ignoring the tight schedule her handlers had prepared. When her private secretary tried to hurry her along, she had politely but firmly insisted on staying until every child had received attention. That day, James realized he wasn't just protecting a royal heir. He was guarding someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. The princess's daily routine began at 6 in the morning with private tutoring sessions. Her education was a careful balance of traditional academic subjects and royal protocol training. She studied French, Spanish, and Mandarin, excelled in history and literature, and showed a particular aptitude for environmental science. Her tutors often remarked on her ability to grasp complex concepts quickly and her talent for asking questions that challenged conventional thinking. James would position himself outside the study room during these sessions, alert to every sound. The princess was known for her animated discussions with her tutors, her voice rising with excitement when debating topics she was passionate about. Climate change, social inequality, and animal conservation were subjects that could keep her engaged for hours beyond the scheduled lesson time. After morning lessons came physical training. Charlotte was an accomplished equestrian and had recently taken up martial arts, much to the concern of her protection team. She argued that learning self-defense was practical and empowering, and eventually convinced her parents to allow the training under strict supervision. James had to admit her dedication was impressive. She approached physical challenges with the same determination she brought to her academic work. The palace corridors buzzed with constant activity. Staff members moved with practiced efficiency, carrying out the countless tasks required to maintain the royal household. Housekeepers ensured every surface gleamed, kitchen staff prepared elaborate meals for various functions, and administrative personnel coordinated the complex schedules of multiple royal family members. James had developed relationships with many of these staff members over his years of service. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, the head housekeeper, had taken him under her wing during his first months at the palace. She had worked for the royal family for over 30 years and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of palace protocol and family history. Her insights had proven invaluable in helping James understand the subtleties of royal protection work. The chef, Henri Dubois, was a temperamental Frenchman who created culinary masterpieces but flew into theatrical rages when his kitchen routine was disrupted. James had learned to navigate Henry's moods, especially during high-stress events when the chef's perfectionism reached new heights. Despite his dramatic tendencies, Henri genuinely cared for the royal family and took special pride in creating dishes that accommodated Charlotte's growing interest in sustainable and ethical food choices. Dr. Margaret Thornfield served as the royal family's personal physician and had been with them since before Charlotte was born. A brilliant woman in her 60s, she possessed a calm demeanor that inspired confidence even in the most stressful situations. James had observed her interact with the princess during routine health checks and had noticed Charlotte's genuine respect for the doctor's expertise and judgment. The princess's private secretary, Miss Sarah Chun, was a young woman only a few years older than Charlotte herself. Sarah had graduated from Oxford with degrees in international relations and public administration before joining the royal household. Her fresh perspective and understanding of social media had helped modernize some of Charlotte's public engagement strategies, much to the approval of younger generations following the royal family. Charlotte's relationship with her parents was complex, balancing genuine affection with the formal expectations of royal life. Her father, Prince William, tried to provide as normal a childhood as possible while preparing her for future responsibilities. Their weekend cycling trips around the palace grounds had become a treasured tradition, moments when Charlotte could simply be a daughter rather than a public figure. Her mother, Catherine, served as both a role model and confidant. Charlotte often sought her mother's advice on matters ranging from fashion choices for public events to handling the pressures of constant public scrutiny. Catherine's grace under pressure and commitment to charitable work had clearly influenced Charlotte's own developing sense of purpose. The young princess's relationship with her siblings added another dimension to palace life. Her younger brother, Prince Louis, looked up to her with obvious adoration, often seeking her help with homework or advice on navigating their unique family dynamics. These interactions revealed Charlotte's natural nurturing instincts and her ability to balance authority with affection. James's daily routine included detailed security briefings where potential threats were assessed and response protocols reviewed. The modern world presented challenges that previous generations of royal protection officers never faced. Social media had created new venues for both support and criticism, and the constant presence of camera phones meant every public moment was potentially subject to global scrutiny. The princess's upcoming schedule included several high-profile events. A visit to a renewable energy research facility would highlight her environmental advocacy work. A speech at a youth climate summit would mark her first major solo public address. These events represented important milestones in her development as a future leader, but they also created additional security considerations. James took particular pride in his attention to detail during advanced security preparations. He would personally visit each venue, mapping out entrances, exits, and potential emergency routes. He studied floor plans, consulted with local law enforcement, and coordinated with palace security teams to ensure comprehensive coverage. His thoroughness had earned him recognition from senior protection officers and the trust of the royal family. The palace's security operations center monitored communications from intelligence services, tracking potential threats, and coordinating with international security agencies. The balance between maintaining royal accessibility and ensuring safety required constant vigilance and adaptability. James had seen firsthand how quickly situations could change and had trained extensively in rapid response protocols. During quieter moments, James would observe the princess's interactions with various staff members and visitors. Her genuine interest in people's lives and work impressed him consistently. She would ask the gardeners about their techniques, inquire about the kitchen staff's families, and remember personal details from previous conversations. This natural empathy seemed to be an integral part of her character rather than a learned royal behavior. Charlotte's academic achievements continued to exceed expectations. Her essays on environmental policy had caught the attention of university professors, and she had been invited to contribute to several youth-focused publications on climate action. Her tutors reported that she was operating at a level well beyond her years, combining intellectual rigor with passionate advocacy for causes she believed in. The princess's fashion choices had also begun attracting attention from international media. She seemed to instinctively understand the power of clothing as communication, often choosing outfits that subtly supported her advocacy work. Wearing sustainably produced garments to environmental events or featuring designs from young British artists at cultural functions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of symbolic messaging. James had witnessed Charlotte's growth from an uncertain young teenager into a confident young woman who seemed increasingly comfortable with her public role. Her natural charisma, combined with genuine compassion and intellectual curiosity, suggested she would become a powerful voice for positive change. Yet he also recognized the immense pressures she faced, constantly aware that her every action was scrutinized and interpreted by millions of people worldwide. The weight of royal responsibility was evident in quiet moments when Charlotte thought no one was watching. James had seen her standing alone in her private sitting room, staring out at the gardens with an expression of contemplation that seemed far too mature for her 15 years. These glimpses reminded him that beneath the public persona was still a teenager navigating the complex transition into adulthood under extraordinary circumstances. As the morning routine continued, James maintained his vigilant watch, unaware that this particular day would test every aspect of his training and challenge his understanding of duty in ways he never could have imagined. The protocols he had memorized, the procedures he had practiced countless times, and the unwavering loyalty he felt toward his charge would all be put to the ultimate test before the day was through. The palace around him hummed with its usual activity, staff members carrying out their daily responsibilities with practiced efficiency. Yet beneath the surface of this carefully orchestrated routine, subtle signs suggested that this day might unfold differently than any that had come before. James's years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and something in the atmosphere felt different, charged with an energy that made him unconsciously more alert than usual. The great clock in the palace courtyard chimed 10 times as Princess Charlotte emerged from her morning tutoring session. James noticed immediately that something was different about her usual confident stride. She moved more slowly than normal, and twice she paused to steady herself against the ornate wallpaper that lined the corridor. Her face, usually bright with enthusiasm after her favorite environmental science lesson, appeared pale and drawn. Charlotte had always been remarkably healthy, rarely missing appointments due to illness. Her robust constitution had become something of a point of pride within the royal household. Dr. Thornfield's quarterly health reports consistently noted the princess's excellent physical condition, attributing it to her active lifestyle and balanced diet. This morning's apparent fatigue struck James as particularly unusual, given her typically boundless energy. During the walk to her next appointment, Charlotte stumbled slightly on the Persian carpet that ran the length of the main hallway. James instinctively moved closer, ready to assist, but she quickly regained her composure and shot him a look that clearly communicated her desire to handle the moment independently. Her stubborn streak had manifested early in childhood and had only grown stronger as she matured into adolescence. The princess's next scheduled activity was a private meeting with representatives from the World Wildlife Foundation, an organization she had championed since learning about endangered species conservation during her 12th birthday visit to London Zoo. She had specifically requested this meeting to discuss expanding youth education programs about biodiversity protection. James positioned himself outside the ornate blue drawing room where the meeting would take place. Through the partially open door, he could hear Charlotte's voice, though it lacked its usual animated quality. She was discussing polar bear habitat preservation, a subject that typically sparked passionate speeches about ice cap melting and corporate responsibility. Today, her responses seemed measured and careful, as if speaking required more effort than usual. The Foundation representatives appeared not to notice, perhaps attributing her subdued manner to royal formality. Mrs. Whitmore appeared at James's side, carrying a silver tea service that gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. Her practiced "I missed nothing in the palace," and she had clearly noticed Charlotte's altered demeanor as well. Without speaking, she raised her eyebrows in a questioning expression that James had learned to interpret over his years of service. He responded with a subtle shrug that communicated his own uncertainty about the situation. The meeting concluded earlier than scheduled, with Charlotte politely explaining that her afternoon appointments required preparation time. As the Foundation representatives departed, expressing gratitude for her time and commitment to their cause, James observed Charlotte's careful movements. She was clearly making an effort to appear normal, but her usual graceful posture had given way to a more rigid stance that suggested physical discomfort. Sarah Chin appeared with Charlotte's revised schedule, noting several changes that had been made to accommodate what she diplomatically termed strategic timing adjustments. The afternoon would include a photography session for an upcoming magazine feature about young royals and environmental activism. This particular shoot had been planned for months and represented an important opportunity to showcase Charlotte's growing influence among her generation. James accompanied Charlotte to her private apartments where she would prepare for the photography session. Her personal stylist, Marcus Williams, had laid out several outfit options that reflected both royal elegance and environmental consciousness. Each piece had been carefully selected to convey specific messages about sustainable fashion and ethical manufacturing practices. As Charlotte reviewed the clothing choices, James noticed her gripping the back of a chair for support. The gesture was subtle, but his trained eye caught the way her knuckles whitened from the pressure she was applying. When Marcus suggested they begin with hair and makeup preparation, Charlotte agreed with uncharacteristic speed, typically preferring to discuss styling choices at length. The photography team arrived with their usual complement of assistants, lighting equipment, and backdrop materials. The lead photographer, Isabella Rodriguez, had worked with the royal family on numerous occasions and had developed a particular rapport with Charlotte. Isabella's ability to capture authentic moments rather than stilted formal poses had made her a preferred choice for magazine features focusing on the younger generation of royals. During the initial setup, James positioned himself to maintain visual contact with Charlotte while remaining outside the photographer's sight lines. He watched as she underwent the transformation that preceded all her public appearances. Makeup artists worked to enhance her natural beauty, while hairstylists created elegant arrangements that would photograph well under the professional lighting. Charlotte submitted to the preparation process with unusual passivity. Normally, she would engage the styling team in conversation about their techniques, their career paths, or their opinions on various fashion trends. Today, she sat quietly in the makeup chair, offering only brief responses when directly addressed. The makeup artist, Elena Vasquez, had to work harder than usual to bring color to Charlotte's complexion. As the photography session began, Charlotte's professionalism emerged despite her apparent fatigue. Years of public appearances had trained her to project confidence and enthusiasm even when she didn't feel her best. Isabella directed her through various poses that would accompany the magazine article about youth environmental leadership, and Charlotte responded with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being photographed. However, James began to notice subtle signs that suggested Charlotte was struggling more than she was revealing. Between shots, when Isabella reviewed images on her camera's display screen, Charlotte would sit heavily in the antique chair provided for her use. Her breathing appeared more labored than warranted by the minimal physical demands of posing for photographs. During a costume change, Marcus privately expressed concern to James about Charlotte's apparent lack of energy. As someone who had worked with her for over a year, Marcus had become accustomed to her enthusiastic participation in styling decisions and her genuine interest in the message conveyed by her fashion choices. Today's subdued responses had clearly raised red flags for the experienced stylist. The photography session required Charlotte to demonstrate various activities related to environmental conservation. She posed with recycling materials, organic gardening tools, and informational materials about renewable energy. Each setup demanded that she project genuine engagement with these props while maintaining the elegant demeanor expected of a royal family member. Isabella's expertise allowed her to capture compelling images despite Charlotte's apparent fatigue. The photographer had learned to work quickly and efficiently during royal shoots, understanding that time was always a precious commodity in the royal schedule. However, she too began to notice that Charlotte's usual animated personality seemed muted. During a break between setups, Charlotte excused herself to use the restroom. James maintained his position outside the door, but his concern continued to grow as minutes passed without her return. When she finally emerged, her face appeared even paler than before, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone fighting nausea or dizziness. Dr. Thornfield made one of her routine appearances, ostensibly checking on the day's schedule, but clearly responding to concerns that had been quietly communicated through palace staff networks. Her brief conversation with Charlotte appeared casual to outside observers, but James recognized the subtle signs of a medical professional conducting an informal assessment. The doctor's presence seemed to provide some reassurance to Charlotte, who managed to complete the remaining photography requirements with renewed determination. However, James noticed that Dr. Thornfield remained nearby rather than departing for her other appointments, a decision that suggested ongoing concern about the princess's condition. As the photography session concluded, Charlotte's thank you remarks to the team lacked her usual warmth and specific personal comments about each person's contribution. Isabella and her assistants packed their equipment with professional efficiency, expressing appreciation for the princess's cooperation and enthusiasm for the project's environmental message. Sarah Chun approached with updates about the afternoon schedule, including a planned visit to a youth climate action group that had been arranged weeks in advance. This particular engagement held special significance for Charlotte, as it would allow her to interact with young people her own age who shared her environmental concerns. Canceling such an event would require careful explanation and likely disappointment for the participating young activists. Charlotte listened to the schedule review with apparent attention, but James observed that she was gripping the arms of her chair with increasing force. Her responses to Sarah's questions about timing and logistics came more slowly than usual, and she seemed to be concentrating intently on maintaining her composure. The palace staff had developed subtle communication systems over years of working together. James caught Mrs. Whitmore's eye and saw his own concern reflected in her expression. Marcus gathered his styling materials with unusual speed, clearly sensing that the princess might need privacy to address whatever was affecting her well-being. Dr. Thornfield's continued presence began to feel less coincidental and more like strategic positioning. She engaged Charlotte in casual conversation about the morning's activities while conducting what appeared to be an informal health assessment. Her questions about Charlotte's energy level and appetite were woven seamlessly into broader discussion about the princess's busy schedule. As the afternoon approached, Charlotte's determination to maintain her public commitments became increasingly evident. She reviewed briefing materials for her upcoming engagement with the Climate Action Group, forcing herself to focus on the information despite her apparent physical discomfort. Her sense of duty had always been one of her strongest characteristics, sometimes to the concern of those responsible for her well-being. James's years of military training had taught him to recognize signs of physical distress, and everything he observed about Charlotte's current state triggered his protective instincts. Yet royal protocol demanded that he respect her autonomy while remaining ready to act if circumstances required intervention. The balance between these competing obligations created a tension that increased his alertness to her every movement and expression. The palace around them continued its usual bustling activity, with staff members carrying out their responsibilities while maintaining the discreet observation that characterized life in the royal household. Everyone who encountered Charlotte that morning seemed to sense that something was different, though none would presume to comment directly on her apparent change in condition. As preparations began for the afternoon's public engagement, James found himself in the position that would define the remainder of this unprecedented day. His duty to protect Princess Charlotte was about to be tested in ways that would challenge every assumption he had about the boundaries of his role and the extent of his responsibilities to the young woman whose safety had been entrusted to his care. The convoy of black vehicles moved through London's afternoon traffic toward the Youth Climate Summit venue at the Royal Institution of Great Britain. Princess Charlotte sat in the back seat of the armored Bentley, reviewing her speaking notes one final time. James occupied the passenger seat, maintaining constant communication with the advanced security team that had swept the venue earlier that morning. Charlotte had insisted on attending this engagement despite Dr. Thornfield's gentle suggestion that she might benefit from a quiet afternoon of rest. The Youth Climate Summit represented everything she was passionate about: young people taking action, environmental advocacy, and international cooperation on global challenges. Missing this event would have felt like abandoning her core values and letting down the 100 young activists who had traveled from across Europe to participate. The Royal Institution's classical facade came into view as their vehicle turned onto Albemarle Street. James could see the organized crowd of young people, media representatives, and security personnel that always accompanied Charlotte's public appearances. Barriers had been erected to manage crowd flow, and uniformed police officers were stationed at strategic points around the building's perimeter. Charlotte's briefing materials indicated she would deliver a 10-minute speech about the role of young people in climate action, participate in a panel discussion with youth representatives from 6 countries, and conclude with individual meetings with selected student leaders. The schedule was ambitious but manageable for someone with Charlotte's experience and energy. Today, however, James worried about her ability to maintain the demanding pace. As their vehicle stopped at the building's entrance, James performed his standard security sweep of the immediate area. Crowds of young people pressed against the barriers, many holding signs supporting climate action and expressing admiration for Charlotte's environmental advocacy. Their enthusiasm was palpable, creating an atmosphere of excitement that typically energized the princess for her public engagements. Charlotte emerged from the vehicle with a smile that appeared genuine despite the pallor that James continued to observe. She waved to the crowd and paused to read several of the signs, a gesture that drew enthusiastic cheers from the young activists. Her natural ability to connect with people her own age had always been one of her greatest strengths in public settings. The building's interior buzzed with activity as organizers made final preparations for the summit sessions. Charlotte was escorted to a private room where she could review her remarks and prepare for the panel discussion. James positioned himself outside the door, coordinating with venue security while monitoring communications from the palace about any schedule changes or security updates. Dr. Thornfield had discreetly joined the entourage, officially accompanying Charlotte to observe youth health and wellness initiatives that were part of the summit program. Her presence provided James with some reassurance, though he knew the doctor's attendance likely reflected ongoing concern about Charlotte's condition rather than genuine interest in the summit's health components. 20 minutes before Charlotte's scheduled speech, Sarah Chin knocked on the preparation room door to begin the final briefing process. When she entered, James caught a glimpse of Charlotte sitting with her head in her hands, a posture that suggested fatigue or possible head discomfort. However, she quickly looked up and engaged with Sarah's questions about timing and logistics. The venue's main auditorium could accommodate 300 people, and every seat had been filled by young climate activists, researchers, policy experts, and media representatives. The energy in the room was electric, with participants from different countries comparing notes on their environmental initiatives and expressing excitement about hearing from Princess Charlotte. James accompanied Charlotte as she was escorted to the stage area. She walked steadily but seemed to be concentrating intensely on each step. Backstage, she declined the offered bottle of water and instead asked for a moment of quiet before her introduction. James used this time to scan the auditorium one final time, noting exit locations and the positioning of security personnel. The introduction speaker, a young climate scientist from Cambridge University, delivered an enthusiastic welcome that highlighted Charlotte's environmental advocacy and her influence among young people worldwide. The audience responded with sustained applause that seemed to lift Charlotte's spirits as she prepared to take the stage. Charlotte's speech began strongly, with her clear voice carrying easily through the auditorium's excellent acoustics. She spoke about the urgency of climate action, the power of youth movements, and the importance of international cooperation on environmental challenges. Her prepared remarks reflected months of research and consultation with climate experts, demonstrating her serious commitment to understanding complex environmental issues. James watched from the side of the stage, noting that Charlotte's delivery was competent but lacked her usual passionate intensity. She was clearly making an effort to project energy and enthusiasm, but her normal animated gesturing was more restrained than usual. The audience seemed engaged and responsive, apparently not noticing the subtle differences that concerned her protection team. Halfway through her speech, James observed Charlotte gripping the podium more tightly than necessary. Her knuckles showed white against the dark wood, and she paused longer between sentences than her practiced speaking style normally required. When she reached for the glass of water placed beside the microphone, her hand trembled slightly before she steadied it and took a careful sip. The speech concluded to enthusiastic applause, and Charlotte smiled broadly as she acknowledged the audience's response. However, as she turned to leave the podium, James saw her stumble slightly, catching herself on the edge of the speaking platform. The movement was subtle enough that most observers likely attributed it to navigating the stage steps in formal shoes. The panel discussion required Charlotte to sit at a curved table with 5 other young people representing different countries and climate initiatives. James positioned himself where he could maintain visual contact while remaining outside the media camera's range. The format was informal, encouraging natural conversation rather than formal presentations. Charlotte's fellow panelists included a 16-year-old renewable energy inventor from Germany, an 18-year-old ocean conservation advocate from Australia, a 17-year-old sustainable agriculture promoter from Kenya, a 15-year-old urban planning enthusiast from Brazil, and a 19-year-old climate policy researcher from India. Their diverse backgrounds and perspectives created dynamic discussion opportunities. During the panel's first 20 minutes, Charlotte contributed thoughtfully to conversations about policy innovation, grassroots organizing, and the role of traditional institutions in supporting youth-led environmental movements. Her responses demonstrated her deep understanding of complex issues and her ability to synthesize information from multiple sources into coherent arguments. James noticed, however, that Charlotte's contributions to the discussion were becoming briefer and more carefully worded. She seemed to be conserving energy, speaking only when directly addressed or when she had particularly strong opinions about specific topics. Her usual tendency to build enthusiastically on other speakers' ideas was notably absent. The moderator, a BBC environmental correspondent, guided the panel through questions about practical solutions, international cooperation, and the emotional challenges of climate activism for young people. Charlotte's response to this final question was particularly poignant. As she spoke about the weight of responsibility she felt to use her platform effectively for positive change. As the panel discussion entered its final phase, James observed Charlotte's posture becoming increasingly rigid. She was clearly making an effort to maintain proper positioning, but her movements appeared forced rather than natural. When she reached for her water glass, her hand shook noticeably before she managed to grasp it steadily. The audience's questions for the panelists covered topics ranging from specific policy recommendations to personal motivation and future career plans. Charlotte answered each query directed to her with thoughtful consideration, but James could see the effort required for her to maintain concentration and articulate complex responses. During a particularly animated exchange about carbon taxation policies, Charlotte suddenly went very still in her chair. Her face lost what little color had remained, and she gripped the edge of the table as if anchoring herself against some invisible force. James immediately stepped closer to the panel table, his training taking over as he recognized signs of impending medical distress. The other panelists and moderator continued their discussion, unaware of Charlotte's rapidly deteriorating condition. James faced a critical decision: intervene immediately and create a public scene, or wait to see if Charlotte could recover sufficiently to complete the engagement. His years of training emphasized the importance of avoiding unnecessary drama, but his protective instincts screamed that something was seriously wrong. Charlotte made eye contact with James for just a moment, and he saw both distress and a desperate plea for help in her expression. She was fighting to maintain consciousness while surrounded by hundreds of people, television cameras, and international media coverage. The situation represented every protection officer's nightmare, a medical emergency unfolding in full public view with no way to provide assistance without creating a spectacle. Dr. Thornfield had positioned herself in the front row of the audience, and James saw her rising from her seat with the subtle efficiency of a medical professional recognizing a crisis. Her movement was casual enough not to attract attention, but purposeful enough to communicate her intention to provide immediate assistance if required. The panel discussion was scheduled to continue for another 15 minutes, followed by individual meetings with selected youth representatives. Charlotte's schedule then included a brief media availability and photographs with summit organizers. Under normal circumstances, she would have embraced every aspect of this engagement with genuine enthusiasm. Instead, James watched as the princess fought to remain upright in her chair while surrounded by young people who admired her commitment to their shared cause. The irony was devastating. Charlotte was struggling to maintain consciousness during an event celebrating the very issues she cared most deeply about, surrounded by peers who looked to her for leadership and inspiration. As the moderator prepared to ask the next question, James made the decision that would define the remainder of this unprecedented day. Every aspect of his training, every protocol he had memorized, and every instinct developed through years of protecting the royal family converged on this single moment. The weight of his responsibility to Princess Charlotte would require him to act in ways that challenged everything he had been taught about the boundaries of his role. The next few minutes would test not only his professional capabilities, but also his understanding of what it truly meant to serve and protect someone whose well-being had been entrusted to his care. The protocols that had governed his actions for 6 years were about to prove inadequate for the crisis unfolding before his eyes. The moderator's voice seemed to fade into background noise as James watched Princess Charlotte's condition deteriorate before his eyes. Her grip on the table edge intensified until her knuckles went completely white, and a thin sheen of perspiration appeared on her forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the auditorium. The other panelists continued their passionate discussion about renewable energy infrastructure, completely unaware that the person sitting beside them was fighting to remain conscious. James's military training kicked into high gear, his mind racing through emergency protocols while maintaining his outward appearance of calm professionalism. Every fiber of his being screamed that he needed to act immediately, but 6 years of royal protection service had drilled into him the absolute importance of avoiding public scenes that could embarrass the royal family or create security vulnerabilities. Charlotte attempted to respond to a direct question about youth leadership and environmental policy, but her voice came out weaker than usual, barely audible over the auditorium's sound system. She cleared her throat and tried again, managing to deliver a coherent but noticeably brief response before falling silent again. James could see her fighting an internal battle, her sense of duty warring against her body's obvious distress. Dr. Thornfield had moved closer to the stage area, positioning herself behind a pillar where she could observe Charlotte without drawing attention from the media cameras. Her decades of experience in emergency medicine were evident in her calculated movements and focused attention on the princess's every gesture and expression. The young climate activist from Germany was explaining her latest solar panel innovation when Charlotte's head began to droop slightly forward. She caught herself quickly and straightened up, but James had seen enough. The princess was approaching the limits of her ability to maintain consciousness, and continuing to wait would risk a complete collapse in front of 300 people and international television cameras. James made his decision in a split second that felt like an eternity. Breaking every protocol he had ever learned about discreet protection work, he stepped onto the stage area and walked directly toward the panel table. His movement was confident and purposeful, designed to suggest that this was a planned intervention rather than an emergency response. The moderator looked up in surprise as James approached the table, but before she could speak, he addressed Charlotte directly. "Your Royal Highness, I apologize for the interruption, but there's been an urgent development regarding your next appointment that requires immediate attention." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making quick decisions under pressure. Charlotte's relief was visible despite her efforts to maintain composure. She nodded slowly and began to push back from the table, accepting James's offered assistance as she rose from her chair. "Please excuse me," she said to her fellow panelists and the audience, her voice steady but strained. "I look forward to continuing these important discussions very soon." The audience responded with polite applause, assuming this was a normal adjustment to the royal schedule rather than an emergency evacuation. James supported Charlotte's elbow as they moved toward the stage exit, his positioning carefully calculated to provide assistance while maintaining the appearance of standard protocol. Dr. Thornfield intercepted them at the stage exit, her medical bag already in hand. "Let's step into the preparation room," she suggested quietly, her tone professional but urgent. James guided Charlotte toward the private space they had used earlier, his awareness heightened to every sound and movement around them. Sarah Chun appeared at their side, her expression reflecting confusion and growing concern. "What's happening?" she asked quietly, falling into step beside them. James provided a brief explanation as they moved through the corridor, emphasizing Charlotte's need for immediate medical attention while downplaying the dramatic nature of the situation. Inside the preparation room, Dr. Thornfield took charge with the swift efficiency that had made her the royal family's trusted physician for over a decade. "Charlotte, I need you to sit down and tell me exactly how you're feeling," she said, guiding the princess to a comfortable chair while retrieving her blood pressure monitor from her bag. Charlotte's facade of composure finally cracked as she sank into the chair. "I feel terrible," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything's spinning, and I feel like I might be sick. My head is pounding, and I'm so tired I can barely think straight." The admission seemed to drain what little energy she had remaining. Dr. Thornfield worked quickly, checking Charlotte's vital signs while asking targeted questions about her symptoms. James positioned himself by the door, monitoring communications from the venue security team, while keeping one ear on the medical assessment taking place behind him. The weight of his protocol-breaking decision was beginning to settle in, but Charlotte's obvious distress confirmed that he had made the right choice. The blood pressure reading was significantly lower than Charlotte's normal range, and her pulse was rapid and irregular. Dr. Thornfield's expression grew more serious as she continued her examination, checking the princess's pupils and testing her reflexes. "How long have you been feeling unwell?" she asked, her voice gentle but insistent. Charlotte struggled to remember when the symptoms had begun. "This morning, I guess. I felt tired after my tutoring session, but I thought maybe I just hadn't slept well. It's gotten worse throughout the day, but I didn't want to worry anyone or cancel my commitments." Her dedication to duty, even when clearly unwell, was both admirable and concerning. James's radio crackled with updates from the venue's security chief, who reported that the panel discussion was continuing without Charlotte while organizers explained to the audience that she had been called away on urgent royal business. The cover story was holding for now, but questions would inevitably arise if Charlotte failed to return for the scheduled individual meetings. Dr. Thornfield completed her preliminary examination and moved to a corner of the room to make a private phone call. James could hear her discussing Charlotte's symptoms with what was presumably a colleague or hospital contact, her voice low but urgent. The gravity of the situation was becoming increasingly clear. Sarah Chun worked her phone to coordinate schedule changes, canceling Charlotte's remaining commitments while developing explanations that would satisfy media inquiries without revealing medical details. Her skill at crisis management was evident as she juggled multiple conversations while maintaining her composure. Charlotte remained slumped in the chair, her eyes closed as she fought waves of nausea and dizziness. The transformation from the confident young woman who had taken the stage less than an hour earlier was stark and alarming. James found himself torn between his protective instincts and his respect for royal protocol, unsure whether he should report the situation to senior palace officials or await direction from Dr. Thornfield. The doctor concluded her phone conversation and returned to Charlotte's side. "I've spoken with the emergency medicine team at St. Mary's Hospital," she explained. "They're preparing to receive you for immediate evaluation. I believe you may be experiencing symptoms of a serious condition that requires prompt medical attention." Charlotte's eyes opened wide at this announcement. "A hospital? But what about my schedule? The youth activists are expecting to meet with me individually." The media availability was supposed to highlight the summit's achievements. Her first concern remained her public obligations rather than her personal well-being. Dr. Thornfield's expression was firm but compassionate. "Charlotte, your health is the absolute priority right now. Everything else can be rescheduled or handled by others. I'm not comfortable allowing you to continue with public engagements until we understand what's causing these symptoms." James stepped forward, adding his voice to the doctor's recommendation. "Your Royal Highness, I respectfully agree with Dr. Thornfield. The most important thing is ensuring your safety and well-being. The people who care about you would want you to seek medical attention immediately." The decision to transport Charlotte to the hospital required careful coordination to avoid creating a media spectacle. James worked with venue security to clear a discreet exit route, while Dr. Thornfield contacted the hospital to confirm their readiness to receive a high-profile patient requiring privacy protection. Sarah Chun continued managing communications with palace officials, the summit organizers, and media representatives. Her ability to maintain calm efficiency while dealing with multiple crisis management tasks demonstrated why she had been selected for such a responsible position at her young age. Charlotte accepted the decision to seek medical attention with reluctant grace, understanding that her condition had moved beyond what could be managed with rest and private care. However, she insisted on making a brief statement to the summit organizers, expressing her regret at missing the individual meetings and her appreciation for the important work being done by young climate activists. The preparation for hospital transport required careful attention to both security and medical considerations. Dr. Thornfield supervised while James coordinated with the emergency response team to ensure Charlotte would receive appropriate care while maintaining the privacy and dignity expected for a member of the royal family. As they prepared to leave the venue, Charlotte looked back toward the auditorium where the summit continued without her participation. The disappointment in her expression was evident, reflecting her deep commitment to the causes she had been unable to fully support that day. James understood that missing this engagement would weigh heavily on her conscience regardless of the circumstances that had made it necessary. The next phase of this unprecedented day would unfold in a hospital setting, far removed from the controlled environment of palace life. James's role as Charlotte's protector would be tested in ways that went far beyond his standard security training, requiring him to navigate medical protocols while ensuring her safety and privacy in an entirely different context. The decision he had made to break protocol and intervene during the panel discussion would have far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond this single day. As they prepared to leave the venue, James reflected on the weight of responsibility that came with protecting someone whose dedication to duty sometimes conflicted with basic self-preservation instincts. The emergency entrance at St. Mary's Hospital had been cleared of regular traffic as Princess Charlotte's convoy arrived under the cover of early evening darkness. James had coordinated with hospital security to establish a discreet entry protocol that would protect Charlotte's privacy while ensuring she received immediate medical attention. The weight of his earlier decision to break protocol continued to press on his mind, but seeing Charlotte's deteriorated condition confirmed that his intervention had been absolutely necessary. Dr. Thornfield had remained with Charlotte during the transport, monitoring her vital signs and providing reassurance while maintaining communication with the hospital's emergency team. Charlotte's condition had stabilized somewhat during the journey, but she remained weak and disoriented, requiring assistance to walk the short distance from the vehicle to the hospital entrance. The emergency department team was led by Dr. Rebecca Stone, a senior consultant with extensive experience treating high-profile patients who required discretion as well as excellent medical care. Her reputation for both clinical excellence and absolute confidentiality had made her the hospital's go-to physician for sensitive cases involving public figures. Charlotte was immediately taken to a private examination room that had been prepared specifically for her arrival. The space was equipped with all necessary diagnostic equipment while providing the privacy and security required for a royal patient. James positioned himself outside the room, coordinating with hospital security while maintaining communication with palace officials who needed updates on Charlotte's condition. Dr. Stone's initial examination revealed symptoms that suggested several possible diagnoses, all of which required comprehensive testing to confirm or eliminate. Charlotte's blood pressure remained dangerously low, her heart rate was irregular, and she was experiencing episodes of severe dizziness that made it unsafe for her to stand without assistance. The medical team worked with practiced efficiency to begin a series of tests that would help determine the cause of Charlotte's sudden illness. Blood samples were drawn for comprehensive analysis, an electrocardiogram was performed to check her heart function, and imaging studies were ordered to examine her internal organs for any abnormalities. Sarah Chun had established a temporary command center in a nearby conference room, managing the complex communications required to keep various stakeholders informed while protecting Charlotte's medical privacy. Palace officials needed regular updates, government security services required briefings on the situation's implications, and media representatives were asking increasingly pointed questions about Charlotte's absence from scheduled commitments. Prince William and Princess Catherine arrived at the hospital within 2 hours of Charlotte's admission, their faces reflecting the worry that any parents would feel when their child faced a medical emergency. James briefed them on the day's events, explaining his decision to intervene during the panel discussion and the subsequent transportation to the hospital. William's response to James's protocol-breaking action was immediate and unambiguous. "You did exactly what you should have done. Charlotte's safety and well-being are more important than any protocol or public appearance. Thank you for recognizing that she needed help and acting accordingly." Catherine went immediately to Charlotte's bedside, providing the maternal comfort that medical treatment alone couldn't offer. Charlotte's relief at seeing her parents was evident despite her continued fatigue and discomfort. The presence of her family seemed to ease some of the anxiety she felt about disappointing people who had been counting on her participation in the climate summit. Dr. Stone consulted with specialists from multiple medical disciplines to interpret Charlotte's test results and develop a comprehensive treatment plan. The initial findings suggested a complex condition that would require several days of hospitalization for proper diagnosis and treatment. The medical team was committed to providing the best possible care while respecting the unique circumstances of treating a member of the royal family. James found himself navigating unfamiliar territory as he worked to maintain security protocols in a medical setting. Hospital environments presented different challenges than palace or public venue security, requiring coordination with medical staff who had their own priorities and procedures that sometimes conflicted with standard protection protocols. The palace's communications team faced the delicate task of managing public information about Charlotte's condition without violating her privacy or creating unnecessary alarm. They prepared carefully worded statements that acknowledged she was receiving medical attention while providing reassurance that she was in good hands and expected to make a full recovery. Charlotte's fellow climate activists from the summit had organized a social media campaign expressing support for her recovery and continuing the environmental advocacy work she had championed. Their messages reflected genuine affection for Charlotte as a person rather than mere respect for her royal status, demonstrating the authentic connections she had developed with young people who shared her passions. As the evening progressed, Dr. Stone was able to provide Charlotte's family with a preliminary diagnosis that explained her symptoms and outlined a treatment plan. While serious, the condition was treatable with proper medical intervention and would not have long-term consequences for Charlotte's health or her ability to continue her royal duties. The medical team's professionalism and discretion had ensured that Charlotte received excellent care while maintaining her privacy and dignity throughout the emergency. The hospital staff's respectful approach to treating a high-profile patient demonstrated their commitment to providing equal care to all patients regardless of their public status. James spent the night at the hospital, maintaining his protective duties while Charlotte rested under medical supervision. His decision to break protocol earlier in the day had initiated a chain of events that resulted in Charlotte receiving the medical attention she needed, but it had also forced him to question assumptions about the boundaries of his role and responsibilities. The next morning brought encouraging news about Charlotte's response to treatment. Her vital signs had stabilized overnight, and she was feeling significantly better after receiving appropriate medical intervention. Dr. Stone expressed confidence that Charlotte would make a complete recovery, but recommended several more days of observation to ensure her condition remained stable. Charlotte's first concern upon feeling better was expressing gratitude to everyone who had helped her during the crisis. She insisted on personally thanking James for recognizing that she needed assistance and having the courage to intervene despite the potential consequences of breaking established protocols. "You saved my life yesterday," she told him quietly during a private moment. "I was too stubborn to ask for help, even when I knew something was seriously wrong. If you hadn't stepped in when you did, I might have collapsed in front of all those people and cameras. More importantly, I might not have received medical attention quickly enough to prevent serious complications." James's response reflected both relief and the profound responsibility he felt towards Charlotte's well-being. "Your Royal Highness, protecting you is my highest priority, even when that means making difficult decisions about protocol. I would make the same choice again without hesitation if similar circumstances arose." The hospital stay provided Charlotte with enforced rest that she rarely experienced in her busy schedule of royal duties and public commitments. She used the time to reflect on the importance of listening to her body's signals and accepting help when needed, lessons that would influence her approach to managing future responsibilities. Dr. Thornfield worked with the hospital team to develop long-term health management strategies that would help prevent similar episodes while allowing Charlotte to continue her active lifestyle and demanding schedule of public engagements. The medical emergency had highlighted the need for more careful attention to her well-being amid the pressures of royal life. Palace officials conducted a comprehensive review of security protocols following the incident, ultimately commending James for his quick thinking and appropriate response to an unprecedented situation. His willingness to prioritize Charlotte's safety over rigid adherence to protocol became a model for how protection officers should handle similar emergencies in the future. The climate summit organizers and participating youth activists expressed overwhelming support for Charlotte during her recovery, emphasizing that her health was far more important than any single event or appearance. Their response reinforced Charlotte's belief that authentic relationships and genuine care for others were more valuable than perfect attendance at public functions. Charlotte's return to public duties several weeks later was met with enthusiastic support from people who had followed her health scare through carefully managed media coverage. Her experience had humanized her in the eyes of many observers, demonstrating that even members of the royal family faced health challenges and required medical attention like anyone else. The incident had lasting effects on everyone involved, from James's expanded understanding of his protective role to Charlotte's deeper appreciation for the people who cared for her well-being. The crisis had tested existing protocols and revealed the importance of flexibility and human judgment in situations that couldn't be anticipated by standard procedures. James continued serving as Charlotte's protection officer with renewed confidence in his ability to make critical decisions under pressure. The palace's formal recognition of his exemplary service during the medical emergency validated his choice to prioritize Charlotte's safety over protocol compliance, setting an important precedent for future emergency responses. Charlotte's recovery and return to her environmental advocacy work demonstrated resilience that inspired many young people facing their own challenges. Her willingness to acknowledge her vulnerability during the health scare made her more relatable and effective as an advocate for causes she believed in. The events of that unprecedented day became a defining moment for both Charlotte and James, illustrating the complex relationships between duty, protocol, human judgment, and the courage required to make difficult decisions when lives and well-being are at stake. Their experience would continue to influence their respective approaches to royal service and personal responsibility for years to come.